Well, we are back. This is the Peggy Smedley Show coming to you live from CES 2018, and I'm excited because I am sitting next to James Stansberry. You are the Senior Vice President of Samsung Electronics, and you work with Arctic, and you're doing all kinds of things, James. And so we were on a panel together earlier this week talking about connected devices, and I think Samsung's connecting the world. So I think that's the most important thing right now.
So, by the way, thank you for inviting me to participate in the panel. And actually, it was great because Google, BlackBerry, or RIM, and IBM were on there. And it's very interesting to see that those companies are actually addressing some of the same challenges that Samsung's looking at for connecting devices.
In the Internet of Things,
in the Internet
and trying
of Things.
to do what you guys are doing right now, or they've been doing, and all of you are doing. And it's been really interesting to have such a great panel and to talk about things that when we talk about the Internet of Things, because I think it's interesting because companies, when they talk about the IoT, have a different view. And right now, we've been talking about the IoT forever, and it's fun getting you folks on to really see the IoT is not just about things, it's about what you get from the things, the information, and that was really what we talked about, and that's what you are really focused on.
Absolutely.
Is the information and how important that is, and that's what you're centered on right now.
Absolutely, but there's so many aspects to it, and I think you're alluding to the data and how the data is kind of the core of it, and use the data to define how you collect it, and then how you collect it is what are the devices. And actually, you know, if you think of it from a service perspective, that's where you go. But I think most of the industry, and I'll say even the Arctic platform, looks at it in the beginning as how do you connect the device. And the reason why we do that is the industry over the last 5 to say 6 years has been moving from devices to connected devices. And then once you have the connected device, then it's like, okay, how does this add value for the customer, and how do you build a service and monetize it? And that's kind of like the phase 2 of what we're dealing with, and it's being addressed. So by the way, let me, just so for your listeners, maybe I could explain a little bit about what we do.
Very much, because you guys do so much, and I think it's important for them not only to think about you as a company that makes a lot of products, but now why it's important, what you're doing with smart things and that. So that would be very important.
Okay, so
that.
This is going to take a little bit of a time.
That's okay, go ahead.
All right. So basically, within Samsung, we made a commitment 2 years ago at a CES keynote that we're going to connect all of our products by 2020. Okay, and by the way, I just did a booth tour of our booth. I actually had.
You were able to get through the whole booth?
I actually had people giving me the tour, and so I had the opportunity to hear it explained. And what I heard was that 75% of the products in the booth are connected already. So I think we're making a lot of progress to that goal.
That's significant.
Yeah, it really is. However, and by the way, what I do for Samsung is I provide an IoT platform, and this IoT platform is used for our internal products, or portions of them, specifically the appliances, things like air conditioners, washers, dryers, refrigerators, that type of product. And I also take that IoT platform and we use it to serve products outside of Samsung, primarily working with other businesses to connect their products to the internet and to create new services. So it's a holistic kind of platform from hardware through the network, through the cloud, and through the mobile app in ways that you can actually monetize the data and everything that you need in order to actually create a connected product, and addressing a lot of the common problems that you have in creating one, like, for example, lack of technical skills for embedded software development or big data analytics, provisioning security and implementing it correctly is built into it. And so what we do for our internal customers and external customers is we put it all together and then we abstract it out so that it decreases their time to market, and it allows them to build a product without having to make the large investment. So in a nutshell, that's what the Arctic platform does, and it's assisting internal and then external. And I'll say one more thing too about the Samsung approach, and then I'll stop and I'll let you ask
No,
questions.
I think it's great.
So there is Samsung believes that the IoT ecosystem should be open. And so what we do is we create a platform that's based on standards, And what we want people to do is to be able to eventually connect our products and our data to other third-party products, as long as they're connected securely. Okay, and so we provide an easy on-ramp to do that, to create an open ecosystem, and we also have the ability to connect to other people's clouds to allow somebody else's devices to share data with our devices. So it's these cloud-to-cloud connectors. So we facilitate that as well. And we can go on and on and on about
and I think that's important because when we were talking on the panel, security is such a big issue.
We spend half the time talking about security.
And I think people don't understand sometimes how very important that is, because we talk about it, we were chuckling that even like you want to know what beer, to kind of make sure you know the beer, but you don't want some hacker to know how much beer you have in your refrigerator, right? But I mean, the idea with security right now is we sometimes take it for granted that nothing is secure all the time. You mean there's always a bad guy, there's bad actors always trying to get in when the Internet of Things, when you're connecting devices. So companies like yours have to constantly be vigilant to make sure when we're connecting all these devices, because we as consumers need your companies like you to make sure when we're putting these devices in our homes that they are secure. It shouldn't be our responsibility. You want to make it your responsibility. And why was that so important for a company like Samsung to really understand that and say that the onus is becoming you guys want to make that your responsibility, and that's what you guys are working on so hard all the time.
Well, interestingly enough, from our perspective, we're trying to first do no harm and be a good corporate citizen.
It's a great line.
I mean, it's really kind of a principle that we have. But at the same time, there's a little bit more of, think about the brand reputation issue. And so the last thing we want is for our customers' privacy to be taken away. At the same time, it reflects really bad on what we're trying to do in terms of innovation and our product quality. So we take it very seriously. By the way, all the panel members, I was really surprised. They were all kind of aligned with this message. But maybe I'm going to sound paranoid, but I think you have to assume that, especially in the world of like a PC, that people could observe what you do, because there's so many hackers out there that are actually trying to extract information from you. It's going to happen. Now, what that means, though, is you have to be very aggressive in terms of how you protect a device. And we have an opportunity with IoT to actually do it right. Learn from what we know about what happened with the PC and the vulnerabilities around it. So there's kind of a history of knowledge in terms of what are the hacks and how do hackers get in. Things like open debug ports. I mean, a couple years ago they hacked that Chrysler Jeep and they actually went through an open debug port. Okay, so obviously when you build a product, close those debug ports, right?
But it's going to happen, right?
Well, I think responsible companies building products will have a list. We have a list of 9 requirements, and they're very detailed in terms of how you implement them, but they're required for the products that we build and to connect to our cloud. And they're things like creating a hardware root of trust on the device so that you can trust it. You can uniquely authenticate that device to your cloud and know that it's not a Trojan, for example. Using secure operating systems and secure storage and the latest encryption technology, and having and by the way, bad things will happen. We talked about this at the panel, the meltdown in the Spectre. Who would have guessed that somebody could have figured out how to actually capture data inside an operating system kernel by looking at the amount of time it takes to go prefetch data? I mean, it's pretty sophisticated, but it happened. And so when
somebody's bored, but go ahead.
I think so. By the way, that's a different brain than mine. I think they have a lot of time on their hands.
Yes. Brilliant brain.
Brilliant. Exactly. They're not playing video games. They're doing something else. But in that case, did you notice? By the way, I went to the Intel keynote. And Brian Kranich's first thing he did is said, we're addressing this and we're rolling all these patches, and so the patching. So a really important component of IoT security is post-deployment over-the-air updating capability. And we make that mandatory for our products and our platform.
And that's a critical thing too, is that over-the-air updates. And we didn't have those years ago, and that's critical with everything, and making sure consumers understand that and why they need to do that on a regular basis. And a lot of those things that we look at that is trying to say that's why we're constantly saying we're using the latest mobility kind of things to make sure those things are happening faster. Why are those things so critical for you guys to look at? You want to maybe have technology that's on 5G and advancing things that become so critical when you guys constantly looking at the latest and greatest when you're doing technology, when you're thinking about things as you keep advancing. Kind of sometimes you have to be faster than you want to be sometimes.
So you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, the pace of technology is moving so fast, and it's interesting because when you introduce new technology, you also introduce new vulnerabilities. I mean, and it doesn't always get better and better. You especially a transition to a new technology like 5G. Now, I'll say one thing about the cellular networks is the fact that they're private. And they use symmetrical key systems, and they're kind of out of band. They're actually very difficult to hack and do an RF capture and hack the data. So we're relatively secure. However, the applications, and we'll talk about 5G, and we don't have 5G on our platform today. However, it's a big push for Samsung.
And that's where you have to go, though. I mean, to keep yourselves, to make things secure, you have to keep aggressively going that way.
So with 5G, though, the applications that you're going to enable with that increase in bandwidth and that reduction in latency are things like autonomous vehicles. And there is where a security issue becomes catastrophic. So in that particular case, we have to get everything right, all the way down to the kernel, all the way out to every debug port and every connection within the car and from the car into the network.
But that's what you're talking about, 5G by 2020. I mean, that's what you guys made that announcement, that's why that's so critical. But thinking about where you are today with the Internet of Things and where you want to be, I mean, you've made that statement, or Samsung's made that statement, that's where you're going to be. But I mean, you're looking at every security thing possible right now and saying we've got a path, a mission, and a strategy to make sure our customers know where we're headed. And that's why it's so critical to say we're not just looking today, we're looking 5 years out, continuing out, 10 years out, constantly saying, it's not saying our customers aren't understanding, we're constantly improving for their security and their safety.
Absolutely, and that's where the over-the-air updates come. And by the way, OTA, over-the-air updates, they're used for basically two things. Someone who deploys an IoT device, if they want to add a new feature, they use OTA, so it's an application level. However, if we are notified of a hack of any part of our software stack all the way up to the cloud, we will push through our network an over-the-air update to fix the security vulnerability. We'll notify the people who have deployed on the platform. We'll either push it or we'll ask them to push it. And so IoT is actually a little bit, I don't say easier, I'll say easier, but these are devices generally without a display, and they're generally deployed by people who actually kind of own the device. So we're not counting on a consumer to choose to do the software update. We're actually managing the fleet, or our customers are managing the fleet to send that security software update out. So it actually happens unbeknownst to the end user sometimes.
Are we right now connecting too many things? I mean, because this idea, we have so many connected devices. Are we getting to this point that we're getting so much data? We have to figure out and we talked about this about services now. We have to know what are the right services, because we're connecting all of these things, getting the data, and with the data, we have to be able to manage the data to offer the right services. So if we're going to connect these things, connect the right things to give the best services. Is that the right thing we should do? It's not just about connecting, it's connecting the right things so that the data we're getting, we can offer the services that make sense so that we're offering the best things for our customers.
Okay, I will give you two
It's a twofold
schools.
answer
There's
there.
two schools of thought here, and I really liked what Venkat from Google said about how they created this data platform, collected all the data, and then they figured out later what the service was. Okay, so there's one school of thought which is extremely successful. I think they showed in their last annual statement they had like $30 billion of service revenue related to that, right?
Right.
The other school of thought, which is I've heard articulated by our chief strategy officer, is that you start with the data that you need based upon the service you want to offer, and then you work backwards to define the devices that you have to and the sensors that have to be deployed in order to collect that data to deliver that service, and that's a much more efficient way to get there. Now, those are the two schools of thought. Because I work for the CSO, I agree with him. However, your question was, do we have too many sensors? And I can tell you, from my perspective, the answer is no, because what we need, and by the way, one of the reasons why we're seeing the emergence of artificial intelligence is because we have all of this data. And the more of these that we have, whether it's a mobile phone or a presence sensor or your, IP camera, all these things can be used to actually add additional services that we don't even know of yet. And we see the second year of Alexa here at CES, and hands down, one of the best user interfaces we've seen in a long time. But there will be something else. Maybe a multimodal combination of, that natural language processing plus a camera and a display and with a personal daemon, but it's backed up by AI. But to be able to do that, you've got to have a lot more information about the person to build context and have a dialogue. And so I don't think so. I think we actually need to collect more data.
So the more data, the more sensors, the more innovation we will get from that, but we just don't even know what that is yet. So we need that more creativity to get there in order to know for the unknown.
Yeah. I mean, who would have predicted Alexa? 5 years ago, right?
I agree
Brilliant.
with you.
Brilliant.
So when we look now ahead of things, what do we see? Samsung's announced a lot of creative ideas with smart things in 2020 and all of these ideas. But when we look at the IoT, what can we expect the IoT is really going to bring to us from a platform's perspective to give us information that we really don't know, because we're connecting our home to our cars, to our cities, to our workplaces. It's going to provide us with services and maybe our healthcare and things that we've yet to know. But the IoT is that platform. And then we're talking about blockchain that we said is now going to do the transactional side of things, perhaps, and who knows what else. Are we there, and when are we there? It's out there.
Okay. So I know we're going to see the benevolent, the benign, and the intrusive when it comes to IoT. It's going to happen, and I think that honestly, if there's a value exchange with the consumer, between giving up your data to get something in exchange, those use cases are going to be the ones that are going to dominate, and we're going to see what those are. At Samsung, and if you walk through our booth, you'll get a feel for this. And we announced this at the Samsung Developers Conference in October. But the idea of our version of the artificial intelligent agent is Bixby. And our vision, since we have all these devices, the mobile phone, the television, the refrigerator, the washer dryer, and all the audio devices, is Bixby will understand you on any of those devices, regardless of whether, say, you have your phone with you, and it'll understand your profile and you in context versus, your husband or your child, and it will interact with you that way. So it's an abstraction of just that one-to-one pairing with a smart speaker to its context aware, even including in your car. And so that's coming, and that's kind of the next phase of where this goes.
And when you think of that pairing, that one-to-one, how does technology advance to do that? People who are listening to that go, isn't that in some ways creepy but awesome? Because the technology is now allowing us to say, but does that get into that whole idea of biometrics and that whole next level that we're talking about in AI that takes us to that level of understanding, how does it identify my husband versus me to have that knowledge to be able to make that without
really,
not being a bad actor?
I think it really depends on the value proposition. For example, I think if I don't have the statistics, but I don't think most people mind that at Amazon will promote another programming book to them because they bought another one. I don't think most people would mind if if the Sleep Number mattress necessarily monitored my sleep at night. However, I think people would mind if somehow, like say Uber, Lyft, when I was away from my home or in my home, and we just saw, we hear about all the time where people post something on Facebook, I'm on vacation in Aspen, and somebody goes and robs their home.
Right.
There is a limit that people will go to, and I think location is actually kind of one of those thresholds. But again, everybody's different, and it's the value exchange. It's a value exchange. By the way, I know that I use Google Maps all the time because it gives me the fastest commute through the Bay Area. But I know that they know exactly where I am. And I know that's kind of intrusive, but it's really valuable for me because it can predict within a minute when I'm going to arrive someplace in traffic.
How about partnerships?
Yeah.
We talked about it's open with Samsung. How important is partnerships for what Samsung wants to accomplish in the Internet of Things? Because we always say you can't do it alone.
No.
You're not on an island. You have to have partnerships in order to be successful with the Internet of Things. Going forward, how more important will partnerships be for Samsung to be more successful and to deliver the things that you talk about?
Oh, it's essential. As a matter of fact, even within my organization, I have a dedicated ecosystem and partnership group. And they're almost as important as our customer interface for what we do. Now, in Samsung overall, you said it, we can't do it all by ourselves. As a matter of fact, even within Samsung, we've merged together the clouds for all of our different groups into one cloud. Some companies as large as ours we're aggregating because there's so much to do. But there are things like analytics of the data that people will do much better. And by the way, I think there's this concept in clouds. It's called the Federation of Clouds, and the idea is that in the future, nobody's going to dominate. It's going to be this interconnected mesh of clouds that are doing very kind of more specific things, and data is being shared between them, and the amalgam is actually the provider of the service. And so you need partnerships with other cloud companies, you need partnerships with other application companies, you need partnerships with, like, even deploying IoT products, you need partnerships with design services companies. I mean, if you go to an IoT show, there's hundreds of companies, and I actually spend more of my time talking to them than I do talking to my customers. Many times.
So is it all going to be this cloud concept, or are we going to do more in the edge? I mean, are we going to do a combination? Because everybody talks about that everything's in the cloud, we say that, but now all of a sudden we're seeing there's some to the edge. What are we talking about in this whole new dynamic changing world that we talk about?
It's actually, in my mind, it's very simple. Does the application have a latency requirement? And if it doesn't, then you can move it to the cloud. But if it does, you need to move it to the edge. And in many cases, the emergence of AI and inference is got to be done at the edge. So there will be a movement of higher performance at the gateway and even the end node, and with AI and analytics. But there will be applications that require it because you're increasing your hardware, communications, compute, and storage costs at the edge. It's much cheaper to do it in the cloud, but then again, there's round trip time on data, and things like, for example, I was talking to someone yesterday in the building industry about IoT door locks, and they were voicing frustration about a 5-second unlock time.
Yes.
And on a deployed door lock in a hotel. And there's a perfect example of where you need to move all of that, or as much as you can, to the edge. Okay. So there's lots of those cases. And latency is the core.
When we look at industries, are there some industries that are going to move faster than others into the IoT, and then are we going to see others then leapfrog? How do you feel about that? Because when we talk about the cloud and the edge, I think we have some who are much more open, some are much more uptight. How are you seeing that right now as Samsung's embracing some of those for the Internet of Things?
I look at IoT as probably 25 to 30 different market segments, and they all have kind of different attributes and timing. And even home automation, I would say, is on the third, going on to the fourth generation of maturity. Okay, some markets like healthcare are just emerging, and others like smart factory have been around for decades, but they're getting attention now. The thing that really drives the pace at which they convert is there a clear business justification, either in convenience, yield increases, reduction in cost in transportation, and they're the ones that are kind of taking off quickly are things like smart factory, because there are very clear returns in terms of yield increases, productivity, and so forth. And the interesting thing about it is a lot of the equipment in factories, it can be easily retrofitted. And so they kind of go out of band from the PLCs in a factory. So smart factories is taking off very, very quickly. A lot of interest in IoT in healthcare. And this is interesting. I mean, healthcare comes down to the payers and the providers.
Yes.
And the payers are very, very interested to know if patients are actually taking the treatment. Well, IoT can do that if the device is connected. So that's starting to accelerate. An interesting market right now is commercial buildings, which is different than home automation, but it's kind of the same. And now we see a lot of movement in people who are providing, HVAC and different, lighting type systems in the commercial buildings. And it's lagged home automation, but it's actually a really good market for IoT because there's a clear return on investment in energy savings and convenience.
Because we're looking at now, they can manage these buildings, they can see what's happening, they can get a greater return and ROI for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, James, I've enjoyed having you here.
Thanks,
Thank you
Peggy.
so much. So, James Stansberry, the Vice President of IoT, thank you so much for being with us. Well, listeners, we're out of time. You can certainly tweet at us at ConnectedWMag. And thanks for watching the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and relevant technology. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility. We're going to take a break, but we'll be back right after this. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching.